Hello and welcome to another episode of Real Life Sci-Fi. This is a segment of a show where we talk about ideas or concepts in sci-fi and horror that have made their way into real life.
Yes, science!
So in today's episode, we're checking out technology that's just as cool as it is terrifying. Nanobots and nanotechnology are a huge part of modern science fiction. But what is nanotechnology?
This is a man-made motor, a motor so small that more than 6,000 of them would fit on the head of a pin. Welcome to the world of the nanometer, a unit of measure that is 1/billionth of a meter.
Well, basically, it's the manipulation of matter on an atomic, molecular, and supermolecular scale. Nanotechnology can be a lot of different types of technology as long as it exists in an astronomically small scale.
The behavior of nanomaterials changes or can change when the size becomes so small when compared with a larger amount of that same material.
Suddenly it's like the periodic table projects out into a new dimension. It's not just that we have the list of elements, it's where we can change their sizes, and each size is a little bit different than every other when it's very, very small.
So this brings us to ideas such as robots as tiny as fruit flies being able to infiltrate the top secret installation, space station, or even a human body. This is all super interesting stuff, and we saw it pretty recently with stuff like Ant-Man, but where does the concept actually come from? Well, you might be surprised. As with so much great and important sci-fi, we need to look to the East. One of the very first mentions of something resembling nanotechnology was when Russian writer Nikolai Leskov wrote The Tale of Cross-Eyed Lefty from Tula and the Steel Flea. You know, a title just rolls right off the tongue. It's about a concept regarding text that was so small it could only be read using a microscope at 5 million times the magnification. More European writers such as Boris Zitkov and the great Stanislav Lem also wrote about what we would eventually call nanotechnology. In Lem's book The Invincible, he wrote about an artificial ecosystem that comprised of tiny little robots. In Zitkov's book Microhands, he writes about microscopic remote manipulators which are used for eye surgery. If we fast forward to 2002, we find the novel Prey, written by Jurassic Park author Michael Crichton. It's widely considered the first largely nanotech-themed book that reached out to a mainstream audience. And in Prey, a huge swarm of nanobots develop independent intelligence and become a threat to humanity. This is of course quite clearly inspired from some of the works of Zitkov, Lem, and Leskov. However, Leskov wrote about what is basically nanotechnology all the way back in 1891. However, there are way more examples of nanotech showing up in sci-fi literature, but let's move on to film and TV. So, nanotech has been pretty prevalent in sci-fi films and series, but interestingly enough, it's even more so in anime. Both Ghost in the Shell and Cowboy Bebop the movie feature nanotech, as well as live-action sci-fi series like The Outer Limits, Stargate, and Red Dwarf. Film examples include entries such as I, Robot, the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, and G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra, which is by far the shittiest film that I've mentioned so far in this video anyway.
Bloody hell, no.
Now, let's move on to the real-life stuff. The basic concepts of nanotech as it exists today were first discussed in 1959, circa 70 years after Nikolai Leskov wrote about the microscript, and almost 30 years after Boris Zitkov wrote Microhands. Physicist Richard Feynman talked about the possibility of manipulating atoms.
In the case of science, I think that one of the things that make it very difficult is it takes a lot of imagination. It's very hard to imagine all the crazy things that things really are like.
The actual term nanotechnology was coined in 1974 by Norio Taniguchi, professor at the Tokyo University of Science. However, it wasn't until the 80s, with a lot of help from the works of K. Eric Drexler and his Foresight Institute, that nanotech began becoming a reality.
Surprise, motherfucker!
In 1981, a tunneling microscope was invented by Gerhard Binning and Heinrich Roher at the IBM Zurich Research Laboratory. This led to the eventual manipulation of atoms in 1989, and to Binning and Roher winning the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1986. Development of nanotech continued throughout the years, but really broke through in the early 2000s. Now, this is still a very new technology, and its use is still debated. Some see it as dangerous technology, whereas others see the immense potential in it in terms of helping people. Today, some of the main uses of nanotech are in the use of nanomaterials, which are used in everyday items such as surface coating, clothing, disinfectants, and fuel catalysts. Tissue engineering is among the most interesting uses of nanomaterials and nanotech, as scientists try to use nanotech to mimic features of cells in our bodies. So basically, take it away, Jim Carrey.
There's no end to the possibilities!
There's so much that can be done with nanotechnology. I mean, imagine being able to switch out sick and dying cells with nanobots. However, that also brings us to an interesting question of where we draw the line between machine and man. I mean, how much nanotechnology can you have in your body while still calling yourself a human being? As you're watching this video, new nanotech is still being developed as we speak, and we're still not sure what limits there are for this amazingly exciting technology. Let's just hope we're prepared for all the opportunities that it brings us. So, that was another episode of Real Life Sci-Fi. We hope you enjoyed it. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian Metal Martinez. Be sure to leave us some comments and suggestions below, and we'll catch you guys next time.
It's interesting that some people find science so easy and others find it kind of dull and difficult. Especially kids, some of them are just eat it up. And I don't know why it is. It's the same perhaps for all subjects. For instance, lots of people love music and I never could carry a tune. And I lose a great deal of pleasure out of that. And I think people lose a lot of pleasure who find science dull.